Hey there, and welcome to the Totally First Crochet channel. My name is Thomas. Today's video is all about granny squares, and I'm going to share with you my top 3 crochet tips to make your granny squares even better. Now, who's ready to elevate your granny squares from okay to perfection? Let's do it. So let's dive right into it. I'm going to show you all of my 3 tips for better granny squares by making 3 granny squares in total, each of them with a few differences in terms of how I start, how I go from one round to the next round, and how to finish it. And first I'm going to show you how I used to make granny squares up until last year, I would say. The way I made granny squares back then and how I learned it, and how most of the granny squares are made when you go through books, crochet books, or also most of the tutorials here on YouTube are like that. You would start by making a slip knot basically, and then chain 4 and 4. So you have your chain of 4, and then you would slip stitch right into that first chain element, that first chain stitch, to create some sort of a ring. And from there you would do a total of 3 chains. So you chain 3 basically to start. This chain 3 then would stand for the first double crochet. So of course for granny squares you would now do 4 clusters of 3 double crochets, and the first one is always a bit different in that way because it has the chain 3, and after that you yarn over and work all the following double crochets in that ring that you made before. Just like this. And here's how it looks. The first cluster all worked in that chain 4 ring as a base. Here you can see the chain 3 from the beginning, and then the 2 double crochets. And then what I did was to chain 2 for the first corner, and then work all the other 3 clusters in that same ring. And I also incorporated the yarn end already in my work, so later on I could cut it already. Okay, so now the first round is almost complete. We have the typical 4 granny square clusters and the 3 corners already. The last corner would then be the one when we close the first round. As you can see in the center, there's also a hole that comes from the chain 4. And here again, you can see that chain 3 from the beginning. And now I am going to show you how to make this a bit better. So at some point I started changing the way how I make my granny squares, and the change already started with the beginning, because starting from the end of last year I started my granny squares with the magic ring. I know a lot of people are having their issues and struggles with the magic ring, and trust me, I had them too. It took me quite a while to find a technique that works for me and for how I hold the yarn. So it's okay if you haven't found your technique yet to make the magic ring. Maybe this one is then your technique. that's how I do it. I hold the yarn around my fingers like this. Then I take the yarn it over so I get this cross here on top. Then I tilt my hand so I can see that yarn way back, and I grab it with the hook, pull it over the cross, and then tilt my hand again and hold and take the same yarn with the hook from behind also to the front, so I get like those 2 loops right over this cross, and then I'm going to slip stitch through it just like this to make a knot. Then I'm going to release everything from my fingers, and right now it's very loose, but you can see the circle already, and by pulling on this side of the circle, I can actually close the knot just like this. It's closed. And then what I can do is that I take the end yarn and drag it to close the ring a bit more, and my magic ring is done. And the yarn end is always the part where you can later on close the magic ring. So this is how I do my version of the magic ring. Again, this is probably not the most elegant way to do it, but it's effective and it works, and that's all I need basically. So once you have the magic ring done, you have 1 loop on your hook, then you go in the magic ring, grab the yarn, pull the yarn through, 2 loops, yarn over, and make a single crochet. And now for those of you who followed me for a while on my channel and have seen a few of my tutorials, probably know what's coming next. Up next is what I call the fake double crochet, which is also known as the stacked single crochet, but I think fake double crochet just sounds way cooler and way more fun. So here's the fake double crochet. So once you have made your single crochet first in the magic ring, you see that there are 2 yarn bars right here, and we are going to grab the long one that goes all the way down, and we go in there with the hook, yarn over or yarn under in that case, pull the yarn through. You now have again 2 loops on your hook. You can push everything up a little bit to create the height, and then you yarn over again and pull through both of the loops, and you just completed your first fake double crochet. And after that, we can simply continue with our double crochets to complete the first cluster. It looks like this. You can always identify the fake double crochet because it's aligned a bit lower than the other 2. Later on, this will help us also. And then the rest is the same. We chain 2 for the corner and then make our 3 more clusters all into that magic ring. And once you made all your 4 clusters, just pull on that end yarn and close it to create the base of your granny square. Now let's compare those 2 options a bit more. So here we have the one with the chain 3 and the chain 4 in the beginning. Here we have the one with the magic ring and the fake double crochet. I think what's pretty obvious is that besides the hole in the center, which is really like if you prefer the center hole, you would always go with the chain 4 in the beginning. If you prefer the closed one like I would usually do, I would go for the magic ring. But the main difference is when you take a look at the beginning of each of them, here with the chain 3, here with the fake double crochet. The fake double crochet looks very, very similar to the other double crochets, whereas the chain 3 always looks a bit off and compared to the others. Some people probably won't mind. Personally, it's something that I'm not that happy about it, to be honest. So my crochet tip number 1 for this crochet tips episode is basically no more chain 3, because if you now continue, what I always struggled a bit is to connect in there. So usually you would do a chain 2 to finish the round and to create the corner element, and then you would have to count 1, 2, 3 to find the third stitch. I mean, here you see already the arc here is a bit weird, and then up here is the stitch. Sometimes it's hard to get it, and then you would usually slip stitch through it. And now you can also see that by this arc here from the chain 3, it just looks a bit off. And in addition, with the slip stitch, doing it in here, you are very limited in terms of how to continue, because now you would have to do 2 clusters of double crochets in that same corner space, like in all the others as well. And in a position like this, it might get tricky, but I'll come to that in a bit. So let me just show you how I then finish the other one, because this brings me directly to my crochet tip number 2, and it's really about how to close a round. So here we had the slip stitch, and here what I tend to do right until last week basically. So instead of chaining 2, I was chaining 1, and then I would go directly into the top of the fake double crochet right in here. I'm going to grab the yarn, pull it through, then I would place my finger right in there to create a little bit of space, and then I would slip stitch through it so that my yarn is basically in the middle of this corner, and like that I could continue directly working in there. Here you see the difference. In the one with the slip stitch into our chain 3, not only does the chain 3 look very ugly, to be honest, but also the position of your loop to continue is right on top of one of the clusters, so it makes it very hard to continue. Whereas here the loop is basically pointing towards the direction of the corners, which is then always easier to work in. I will show you what I mean. When you have our option 1 here, now there are 2 options. One option would be to turn your work and continue working in that corner space. Some people would do then the 2 clusters in there, so you shifted basically the beginning of your work from the corner somewhere to the middle, which is something that I personally don't like. And in addition, by turning the work, you get like rounds that look different, because the granny clusters look different on both sides. So when you turn it, you basically see here the back side, and then the round that you do will look like this other side. And this is something that I never liked. I always want to have the work all in the same way, basically. So what I did last year to go around this, I would turn my work. I would go in that corner space and just make a slip stitch to arrive again in the center of my corner, basically. And then I would go and make a chain 3, 1, 2, 3, because this is the chain version, basically. So this then represents my very first double crochet, and then I could continue placing 2 more double crochets in there, just like this. The advantage of this is that you basically overlay the messy part here with the double crochets, and from there you could then go directly into the next corner to make your next clusters. Now the yarn has something against me. And again, chain 2 to create the next corner. So here we go, round number 2 of the first version, the non-recommended version, with those chain 3 in the beginning and in between the rounds. Here it's even a bit twisted because I twisted the yarn, I turned my work, basically, and here it just looks a bit messy. You can tell visually that this part here looks different than all the other parts with the nice double crochets. So this is definitely not what I want my granny squares to look like. So to show you how this one here is done, my hook and the working loop is already in the middle of the corner space, and the way how we start this second round for this version is of course our fake double crochet. So you go in there, yarn over, pull the yarn through and make a single crochet, and then we go into that front bar and pull the yarn up, pull through, and you made your first element of your cluster. Then 2 more double crochets to complete your first cluster. So as you can see, by having it or having the yarn in the right direction or the working loop in the right position, you can immediately continue with the round. You don't have to flip around or make a slip stitch first and then chain 3 and then turn the work. It's all in the same direction, and you can start directly with your granny pattern. So here we go. We can now make a little inspection of how the 2 versions look next to each other. I'm going to pull on that end yarn a little bit because the center opened up a little bit, which is okay. Let's compare. So here's the original one, or the original version, and here's the one with the magic ring and the half double crochets, and the way with one chain and then a slip stitch into the corner. And as you can see, I think it's pretty obvious that the one here on this side looks much more homogenic, much more symmetrical than this one. Also in terms of the overall feel, this feels much more like a square versus this is like a wobbly something. And especially when you compare the beginnings, like here with the chain 3, it just looks very, very messy. Personally, I think so. And here you can clearly see the clusters. Here's our fake double crochet. You can always identify it because the top of it is a bit lower than the rest. Here it will be then probably be very hard to get like those 2 stitches on top to connect. Here it will be easier. But this was only half of the tip, basically, because last week I got a comment from a fellow viewer. Hi, Brandon. I hope you're watching this. Who gave me, for me, a game-changing tip when it comes to how to close the round. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a bit, because for that I need a third granny square. And here we are. I basically made it the same way like I made option number 2, so with the magic ring and the fake double crochet right here. And remember how I connected those 2 granny clusters together for the second one? I chained 1 basically and then went into that space, the version with the fingertip here, and then close it. There's actually a much nicer and much faster way, thanks to my friend Brandon, and it goes as follows. When you just want to close it, we close it with a half double crochet. When I first read it, I was like, how the hell is this going to make my life easier? But interestingly, it is making it much easier, because for the half double crochet, you yarn over, you go directly into the top of your fake double crochet, grab the yarn, pull it through, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, and then pull through all 3 loops. And guess what? Look where the loop is to work in, directly where I want to have it. Quite funny. I would have never thought about this. And from here, it's super easy to make the next fake double crochet or a stacked single crochet right on top of it. And you're exactly where you should be to make your first cluster of round 2. So this was also my crochet tip number 2. When closing the round, don't chain anything, go directly into the top of the fake double crochet with a half double crochet. So here you have all 3 versions basically. Here the one with the chain 4 in the beginning and the chain 3 in between the rounds, joined with a slip stitch in the third element. Here you have with the magic ring and the fake double crochets and joining with the finger version basically. And here you have the version with magic rings, fake double crochets, and the joining by the half double crochet. personally, for me, this one is absolutely off. It looks so messy compared to the other two versions. They both look very similar. The only difference that you could spot is actually that very first hole here in one of the corners, because the one with the finger version, this is also why I place the finger in there, is to create some sort of space where there's no space, basically. And this is why this hole here is always a bit smaller and a bit off in position, but still fine, still much, much better than this one. I mean, take a look at this very sad looking hole here. And for Brandon's version, basically, we get 4 absolutely symmetrical holes in all of the 4 corners. I mean, I'm just so amazed how awesome this looks and how symmetrical everything is. And each cluster looks basically the same. Here's our fake double crochet. It's like, it just blends in there perfectly to create a perfect granny square. And here you have all 3 of them. And even by this, you can tell where there's the mistake. So this brings me now to my third and final crochet tip for this video. And this is about how to finish off your granny square. So again, this is how I learned to finish off a granny square. You would chain 2 since we're in the corner, and then you have to try to get those 2 yarn strands from the third chain 3 element. Grab the yarn, pull it through, and make a slip stitch, and then yarn over again, slip stitch, and pull the yarn through, and pull it tight, basically like this, leaving this extra pretty knot on the side. I have so many granny squares that look exactly like this, because I thought this is the way to do it. And then you would basically take the yarn needle and sew the yarn end in. I'm just going to make this pretty roughly, because this version is so me. It's pretty awful to do it like this, but unfortunately so many people do it like this still, because they watch old tutorials and stuff. And probably the only advantage of this way to do a granny square is that you can actually cut the beginning yarn end because you already worked it in. And this is how I would have completed my granny square right until last year. Look how pretty this looks here. Sorry, I shouldn't joke about this, but when you then later on see the other ones, you know what I mean. Because for those 2, the end is pretty much the same, because now we are going to make an invisible end, basically, so you can cut the yarn. And the way how to do that is the same, basically. You chain 2, and then you pull the yarn through, grab your yarn needle. So tip number 3, again, here's our fake double crochet that's a little bit lower than the other one, so this also comes quite to our advantage for the end, because we are going to skip this and just go into the next one from the top all the way through, just like this, and you pull the yarn through until you have it basically aligned over the fake double crochet here, because we are now recreating our regular stitch, the V. And to do this, we are just going in that last chain element from the top and now pull it through just like this. Then you can even drag on the yarn a little bit to recreate our typical border. And guess what? There's no hole or anything like it. And you can then easily incorporate it or sew it in already into your granny square to hide it. And you don't see anything. And then, of course, the yarn end from the start, you just sew it in the base of your granny square. Make sure to go through some yarn strands just to make sure that it's locked nice and tight. And here you go. If I twist and turn it a few times, it's going to be interesting to see where our invisible join was. Was it here? Yeah, it was here. And the third version works exactly the same way. And here you have it. The most symmetrical one. Absolutely perfect, absolutely symmetrical. So here are all 3 versions. And now it's basically up to you which one you prefer. I mean, this one for me is an absolute no-go. With the knowledge I have today and all the tricks that I learned from others, and by experimenting a little bit myself, the version with the chain free, I mean, no more chain frees. I should put that on t-shirts actually, no more chain free. And then changing the rounds by slip stitching into the top of the chain free, then going back, then making the first cluster, and then the super ugly end of your work. And overall, it just doesn't look squarish at all. It looks very wonky. So this one you would definitely have to block, but to be honest, I wouldn't even block this. For me, this is a big no-no. And then here the second one with the magic ring in the center, then the fake double crochet in the beginning of each round. And then the join or the end of the round with creating the hole with the finger, which works fine, and it's also pretty much symmetrical, and the end with the invisible end where there's no knot. And here my new favorite version, Brandon's version basically, with the magic ring, the fake double crochet, and to join the rounds with a half double crochet, and of course the invisible sew-in the end for the most symmetrical and perfect granny square. You got it? So my top 3, no more chain free. That sums it up. And like that, each granny square will look absolutely perfect and is ready to make whatever you want to do with it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed seeing my top 3 crochet tips to make your granny squares better. Remember, these are just my personal ideas and tricks to make granny squares. Of course, if you have your own way of doing them, I'm sure they look amazing, and keep on doing so. If not, maybe this was an inspiration for you to change things up. So I hope to see you again next time, only on the Totally Fierce Crochet channel. Bye!